Spring, 1911. The Irish coast. When the nets started coming up torn, we thought it was sharks. When the Coughlin brothers disappeared from their boat, oilskins folded neat, lunch still packed, we knew it was something worse. The old women said the merrow had returned. The creatures from the deep, the ones who don't think like us. And they were right. This is what I saw in those waters. What rose from the depths to meet us. If you want to know what's really out there, subscribe, because some things the sea never forgets. I still recall the chill of early 1911 more vividly than any human face. It was not the honest, biting frost of a winter gale, but a wrongness, a sensation that oozed up from the black channel between Inishmore and the mainland, viscous as fog and twice as unnatural. It burrowed into your marrow, mocking the fire's warmth. The village crones, crossing themselves with trembling hands, whispered that the ocean was keeping something cold perfectly preserved. I was 23, a fresh recruit from Galway standing on Patrick Doyle's timber deck, and I arrogantly dismissed their murmurs as rural theater. The sea, however, was preparing to strip me of that arrogance. I was Seamus O'Connor, driven to the waves because my father's debts were crushing and the mills paid only in copper. Captain Doyle commanded a severe vessel, just himself, me, and Liam Byrne, a weathered husk of 40 years sculpted by salt spray. We trawled the twilight waters between the jagged cliffs and the heaving Atlantic, dragging up cod and mackerel, dragging up our livelihoods from the dark. It was brutal, honest labor that left you sleeping like a corpse, hands permanently clawed around phantom ropes. Ballycraig clung to the precipice like a stone barnacle, 30 souls bound by ancient blood. Mrs. Kathleen Murphy ruled the inn, a stone tomb smelling of peat and boiled cabbage, mourning a husband swallowed by the sea 15 years prior, in a storm the locals still feared to name. Father Brennan, the parish priest, was a skeletal figure with eyes hollowed by witnessing too much silent suffering. For 30 years, he had baptized the young and buried the old, hoarding every dark secret the village concealed. At the public house, old Declan Walsh reigned every evening, drinking away his pension and weaving tales that grew more grotesque with every pint. His daughter, Bridget, 19 and as sharp as a filleting knife, watched everything in silence, her eyes missing nothing. These were the ghosts of our small world, trapped between the granite and the abyss. We launched before the sun bled into the sky, when the water looked like hammered lead. Doyle navigated by instinct, while Liam taught me the grim rituals, reading the depth by the water's color, sensing the net's burden on the line, and gutting life with 3 precise strokes. The stench of brine, scales, and diesel became my atmosphere. We worked until our spines cracked, sold our catch to the Galway merchant, and repeated the cycle. It was the second week of March when the atmosphere shifted. The gulls vanished. We tossed offal overboard, but the birds refused to dive, terrified of something lurking below. Liam sensed it too, and over a lunch of stale bread, finally confessed he hadn't seen a seal in weeks. "They are always here," he murmured, scanning the empty, ominous rocks. "It is pupping season. There should be dozens." The old man's face went still. He set down his pint with unusual care. "Aye," he said quietly. "Spring of 1895. Didn't see a seal for 2 months. That was the year Mary Donovan's boy disappeared while checking his lobster pots. They found his boat drifting empty, the pots still in it. Never found him." "Jesus, Declan," someone muttered. "Don't start with that." But the damage was done. The silence in the pub felt thick. Father Brennan, sitting in the corner with his usual small whiskey, spoke up. "The sea has its moods. We respect them and keep to our work. That's how it's always been." Practical words, but there was something in his tone. A wariness that suggested he believed more than he was saying. I walked back to my rented room above the chandler's shop that night, and the cold coming off the water made me pull my coat tighter. The moon was nearly full, turning the sea to rippled silver, and far out near the rocks where the seals should have been, I thought I saw something surface briefly. A pale shape that was there and gone too quickly to be sure. Probably just foam, probably just the moonlight playing tricks. But I stood at the window longer than I needed to, watching. The next morning, our nets came up torn. Not frayed or worn, torn, with great ragged holes ripped through the mesh as if something had clawed its way free. We'd been fishing the same spot for weeks without issue. Captain Doyle examined the damage with his jaw set hard. "Shark, maybe," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. Liam ran his fingers over the torn edges. "No shark I ever saw left marks like this. Look, it's almost like fingers pulled at it." I thought he was being dramatic until I looked closer. The pattern was wrong for teeth or even claws. The fibers were pulled and stretched in ways that suggested something had gripped and yanked. We spent the rest of the day mending what we could and headed in early, subdued. At the inn that evening, Mrs. Murphy served mutton stew and kept her opinions to herself, but Bridget lingered near our table while clearing dishes. "You're the third boat this week with torn nets," she said quietly. "The Fitzpatrick brothers lost 2 traps torn clean apart. Found them washed up with the doors bent outward, like something forced its way out from inside." "That's impossible," I said. "The doors only open from outside." She gave me a look that wasn't quite pity. "Aye, that's what they said too." Over the next week, the wrongness intensified. More nets came up damaged. The Coughlin's boat lost an anchor, just gone, the chain severed clean through, though it was new iron. Tom Sullivan, who ran lobster pots off the North Point, pulled up 3 traps that had been torn to pieces. The lobsters inside gone. No fisherman worth his salt would sabotage another man's livelihood, and even if they did, we were all losing catch. It made no economic sense. The village women started leaving offerings at the holy well up the cliff path. Coins and ribbons, the old superstitions that supposedly had been abandoned generations ago. Father Brennan pretended not to notice, which was its own kind of noticing. At Mass that Sunday, he preached about faith in the face of uncertainty, but his usual fire was muted. We were losing money every day, and you could feel the pressure building in the community like a barometer before a storm. It was Declan, deep in his cups on a Thursday night, who finally said the word we'd all been thinking around. "Merrow," he said, and the pub went quiet. My grandfather saw one back in 1847 during the famine. Said it was sitting on the rocks at dawn, combing its hair with a piece of bone. Had a woman's face but wrong proportions, too wide, too flat, and scales on its arms that caught the light like fish skin. He watched it slip into the water, and 3 days later his brother drowned in calm seas. "That's just stories," someone protested, but weakly. "Stories older than the church," Declan said. "Older than the village? The Merrow were here first, and they don't take kindly to being forgotten." Father Brennan stood abruptly and left. The rest of us sat in uncomfortable silence, nursing our drinks and avoiding each other's eyes. Because here's the thing about growing up on the Irish coast. You can call yourself modern. You can go to mass and trust in steam engines and electric lights in the cities. But the old knowledge sits in your bones anyway. The sea is older than Christianity, and it keeps its own rules. That night, walking home, I heard something that stopped me cold halfway across the village square. Singing. A woman's voice, coming from the direction of the cliffs, high and clear and unutterably lonely. It rose and fell like the tide. Wordless, but full of meaning I couldn't quite grasp. Beautiful and terrible all at once. I stood frozen, my heart hammering, until the song faded into the wind. In the morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. But at breakfast, Bridget asked if I'd heard anything strange in the night. The look in her eyes told me she already knew the answer. The next evening, Captain Doyle announced we'd be setting nets at dawn by the outer rocks. Deeper water, farther from whatever was haunting the coastal spots. Liam and I agreed, though neither of us said what we were thinking. That maybe distance wouldn't matter. That maybe whatever was out there would find us regardless. I spent that night unable to sleep, listening to the wind rattle my window and the distant percussion of waves against stone. Somewhere out in the dark, something was waiting. The sea was keeping it cold, keeping it preserved, keeping it hungry. And we were going to row right out to meet it. We set out in darkness so complete, it felt like rowing through ink. Captain Doyle insisted on it. Said we'd reach the deeper waters by first light and have the full day to work. The engine's putters seemed obscenely loud in the pre-dawn stillness, and our wake glowed with phosphorescence, trailing behind us like a ghost. Liam smoked his pipe in silence, the tobacco smell mixing with diesel and salt. None of us spoke. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like fear. The outer rocks emerged from the gloom as the sky began to pale. Jagged teeth of stone that had sunk a dozen ships over the years, marked on charts with warnings and crossed bones. We gave them wide berth, but they were our landmark. The water here ran deep and cold, the currents unpredictable. Good fishing if you knew what you were doing, dangerous if you didn't. Captain Doyle had been working these waters for 20 years. If anyone knew what they were doing, it was him. We dropped our nets as the sun broke the horizon, turning the water from black to gray to a pale green blue. The morning was clear and cold, the kind of day that would have felt like a blessing a month ago. Now it just felt exposed. I kept catching myself scanning the water's surface, looking for what? I didn't even know. Just something wrong, something other. The first 2 hauls came up decent. Cod mostly, some haddock, enough to make the trip worthwhile. We worked mechanically, our hands knowing the motions, even while our minds wandered. It was on the 3rd haul around mid-morning that Liam went still. "Captain," he said quietly, "look at the net." We all looked. The mesh was covered in something, a thick, translucent slime that caught the light like oil, but smelled like nothing I'd encountered before. Not quite fish, not quite rot. Something organic, but wrong. It coated the ropes in patches, and where it touched the catch, the fish looked wrong too. Their scales dull, their eyes clouded. Captain Doyle reached out to touch it, then thought better of it. Jellyfish, maybe. Some kind of bloom. But there were no jellyfish in the net. Just that slime, glistening and viscous, and the ruined fish. We threw the catch back, couldn't sell it looking like that, and spent 20 minutes scrubbing the net with seawater and rags. The slime came off reluctantly, leaving our hands tingling and numb. Liam's face had gone gray. "I've been fishing these waters 40 years, he said. "Never seen anything like that?" We moved to a different spot, farther from the rocks. The fourth haul came up torn again, great gaping holes ripped through the mesh. And this time we found something caught in the remains. A piece of something. Flesh, I thought at first, but it was too tough, too pale. Like skin but thicker, with a texture that reminded me of shark hide. And it was cold. Not sea cold, but cold like something that had never been warm. Captain Doyle wrapped it in cloth and stowed it without a word. We pulled the nets in early and headed back, the catch barely worth the fuel we'd burned. The sun was still high when we reached Ballycraig's small harbor, and I was grateful for the daylight. The thought of being out there at dusk made my stomach clench. That evening, Captain Doyle took the strange specimen to Father Brennan. I wasn't there for the conversation, but Liam was, and he told me about it later over whiskey at the pub. The priest had gone pale when he saw it, made the sign of the cross, and locked it in his office without touching it directly. "He knows what it is," Liam said. "He wouldn't say it, but I saw his face. He knows." The next morning, we found the Coughlin brothers' boat adrift, empty. Their nets were still out, marked by the bright buoys that bobbed on the swell. The boat itself was undamaged. Engine off, anchor pulled up. Nothing broken or disturbed. Just empty. Their oilskins were folded neatly on the bench. Their lunch pails were unopened. It was as if they'd simply stood up and walked off across the water. The search started immediately. Every boat that could be spared went out, combing the waters in an expanding grid. We searched for 6 hours, finding nothing. No bodies, no debris, no sign of struggle. The Coughlins had lived in Ballycraig for generations. Everyone knew them. Michael was 42 with a wife and 3 children. Sean was 38 and engaged to Mary Donovan's daughter. Good men, careful men. Men who knew these waters like their own hands. By evening, the search was called off. The tide and currents had had too much time. If they'd gone in the water, and no one wanted to say drowned, as if avoiding the word would change the reality, they could be anywhere by now, or nowhere we could reach. Mrs. Coughlin's keening carried through the village that night, a sound that made you want to press your hands over your ears. The children picked it up, not understanding, just mirroring their mother's grief. Until the whole house was full of wailing. Father Brennan stayed with the family. The pub was packed but silent, men drinking grimly and staring at nothing. It was Declan who broke the silence. "It's got the taste for us now," he said. "The merrow. Once they take the first, they don't stop." "Shut your mouth," someone snarled. Those boys might have had an accident. Engine failure, fell overboard. Both of them? At the same time? Without a struggle or a shout loud enough for anyone to hear? Declan's voice was steady, but his hands shook. "And their oilskins folded neat as Sunday clothes? You telling me they folded their coats before drowning?" No one had an answer for that. The silence stretched until someone changed the subject to the weather, and we all pretended to care about rain forecasts. But we were thinking the same thing. Something had taken the Coughlin brothers. Something from the sea, and none of us knew how to fight something we couldn't even name. That night I dreamed of the singing. The woman's voice, high and clear and impossibly beautiful, calling from the rocks. In the dream, I was rowing toward it, unable to stop myself, while Liam screamed warnings I couldn't hear. I woke in a cold sweat, my sheets soaked, my heart racing. The church bell was tolling 3 in the morning. Through my window, I could see the moon setting over the water, and for just a moment I thought I saw something pale on the distant rocks. Then clouds covered the moon, and everything went dark. Captain Doyle called a meeting the next morning. Every fisherman in Ballycraig gathered at the harbor, maybe 15 of us all told. The captain's face looked older than it had a month ago, carved deep with new lines. "We can't keep going out," he said. "Not until we know what's happening. I'm suspending operations until..." "Until what?" Tom Sullivan interrupted. "Until it goes away? Until we starve? This is our livelihood, Patrick. We can't just stop." "Better poor than dead," someone muttered. "Are we really saying we believe in sea monsters?" Tom demanded. "In 1911? With steamships and telegraphs and... I don't care what year it is." Captain Doyle said quietly. "I care the 2 men are gone and our nets keep coming up torn, and there's something wrong with these waters. Call it what you want. I'm not risking my crew." The meeting dissolved into argument. Half the men wanting to keep fishing, desperate for the income, half agreeing with Captain Doyle. In the end, it was decided that boats would go out in pairs, staying within sight of each other, and no one would work after dark. It was a compromise that satisfied nobody, but felt better than nothing. That afternoon, Bridget found me mending nets outside the chandler's shop. She stood watching for a moment before speaking. "My grandmother told me stories," she said. "About the merrow. She said they're not evil, not exactly, just different. They don't think like we do. To them, drowning a man is no different than us catching a fish." "That's not comforting," I said. "It's not meant to be." But she also said they can be bargained with, offerings, respect. Sometimes they'd leave a boat alone if the fishermen poured whiskey into the sea and asked permission to take from their waters. I looked at her. "You're saying we should try to make peace with it?" "I'm saying my grandmother lived to be 93, and she never lost a man to the sea in all her years of marriage. And every morning before her husband went out, she'd walk to the shore and leave something, a coin, a flower, a piece of bread, just something to show respect." That evening, I walked down to the harbor alone. The sun was setting, painting the water gold and red. I pulled a flask from my pocket, good Irish whiskey, the kind you saved for special occasions, and poured it into the sea. Felt like a fool doing it, a grown man making offerings to fairy tales. But I did it anyway. "I'm sorry," I said to the water, "for whatever we did to anger you, for taking without asking, for forgetting you were here first." The water lapped at the stones. A gull cried somewhere overhead. Nothing answered. I stood there until full dark, watching the waves roll in, and then I walked back to the village. Behind me, very faint, I heard it again. The singing. Beautiful and terrible and utterly inhuman. And this time, I didn't run. I stood and listened until it faded, committing every impossible note to memory. Because part of me understood, whatever was out there, it was trying to tell us something. Whether we could understand it in time was another question entirely. The next morning, Captain Doyle found his boat's anchor chain wrapped in seaweed, arranged in patterns too deliberate to be natural. Liam found a dead fish on his doorstep, its eyes replaced with small white stones. And on the rocks where the Coughlin brothers used to tie up their boat, someone, or something, had left a pile of shells arranged in a perfect spiral. The sea was speaking. We just didn't know the language yet. Father Brennan called a meeting at the church that Sunday after Mass. Every soul in Ballycraig attended. Even old Mrs. Flaherty, who hadn't left her cottage in 3 years, made the journey, leaning heavily on her granddaughter's arm. The priest stood before us, Gaunt and pale, the specimen Captain Doyle had brought him lying on a white cloth on the altar. In the candlelight, it looked even more wrong than it had in daylight. Pale and tough and utterly unnatural. "I've written to the bishop," Father Brennan said, "and to colleagues in Galway who study such things. No one can identify this tissue. It's not from any fish or mammal they know." He paused, his hands gripping the pulpit. "I've also consulted the old records, the parish documents going back 200 years. And I found something." He produced a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age. Father O'Malley, who served this parish from 1823 to 1847, kept detailed records. In 1832, there were similar occurrences: torn nets, missing fishermen, strange sightings. The village made an offering. A silver cross was cast into the sea at the place where the rocks form a natural archway. After that, the troubles stopped. For 15 years, they stopped. "Until the famine," Declan said quietly. Father Brennan nodded. "During the worst of the famine years, the offering was forgotten. People were dying. Survival took precedence over ritual. And the disappearances began again. 5 men in 2 months. Father O'Malley wrote that on the night before the last man vanished, he heard singing from the cliffs. A woman's voice. He described it as the most beautiful and most terrible sound he'd ever heard. The church was utterly silent. Even the children sensed the weight of what was being said and sat motionless. "I'm not saying I understand this," the priest continued. "I'm not saying it fits with my theology or my understanding of God's creation. But I am saying that something is out there. Something that was here before we were, and it seems to respond to acknowledgement, to respect." Tom Sullivan stood. "You're asking us to throw silver into the sea? To make offerings to some pagan thing? Father, I'm asking us to survive." Father Brennan cut him off. "I'm asking us to consider that pride and modernity might matter less than 2 more men coming home to their families. You want to call it superstition? Fine. But the Coughlins are gone, and unless we do something, we won't be the last." The debate raged for an hour. Some called it blasphemy. Others pointed out that the church had been built on far older holy sites, that Christianity itself had absorbed older traditions. Mrs. Murphy finally settled it by standing and announcing that she would donate a silver candlestick from the inn. "It was my grandmother's," she said, "and she'd have wanted it used to protect the village, not to sit gathering dust while boys drown." Others followed. Silver coins, a small crucifix, a lady's brooch that had been in the Doyle family for generations. By the end, we had a collection worth perhaps £20, a fortune for a village like ours, melted down and given to the sea. Father Brennan blessed each item, his face troubled but resolved. We would make the offering at dawn. Every man capable of rowing would go, a flotilla of boats converging on the natural archway in the rocks. We would cast the silver into the deep water there, and we would ask, beg, if necessary, for safe passage through these waters, for the right to fish without fear, for peace between our world and whatever lay beneath. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by my window watching the moon track across the sky, the silver light turning the sea to mercury. Around midnight, I saw them. Shapes in the water, pale and sinuous, moving with a grace no fish possessed. They surfaced and dove, and for just a moment, I saw one clearly in the moonlight. It had the torso of a woman, but wrong. Too long, too pale, the proportions subtly off in ways that hurt to look at. Its arms ended in webbed hands, with fingers too numerous and too jointed. And its face, when it turned toward the village, was beautiful and awful all at once. Wide eyes that reflected light like a cat's. A mouth that seemed too large, full of too many teeth. Hair that moved in the water like kelp, dark and streaming. It saw me. I know it saw me, because it stopped moving and held my gaze. For a heartbeat that lasted forever, we looked at each other across the distance. And then it smiled, a horrible, knowing expression, and slipped beneath the surface. I stood frozen at the window until dawn began to gray the sky, my heart hammering against my ribs. We gathered at the harbor as the sun broke the horizon, 20 men in 7 boats, Father Brennan at the front and Captain Doyle's vessel with a bag of silver clutched to his chest. The water was calm as glass, the morning so still you could hear conversations from boats 50 yards away. We rowed in silence, the only sound the dip and pull of oars and the cry of gulls overhead. The archway loomed before us, a natural cathedral of stone carved by millennia of waves. The water here was deep, 40 feet or more, and so clear you could see schools of fish moving in the depths like clouds of silver. We formed a rough circle, boats bobbing on the gentle swell, and waited while Father Brennan stood. He spoke the ritual words, a mixture of Latin prayer and older invocations he'd found in Father O'Malley's journal. His voice carried across the water, solemn and clear. Then he opened the bag and began to cast the silver pieces one by one into the sea. They tumbled through the water, catching the light as they fell, disappearing into the blue-green depths below. For a long moment, nothing happened. We waited, barely breathing. Then the water began to move. They rose from the depths slowly, deliberately. 3 of them, 4, 5, the merrow, revealed at last in full daylight. They were smaller than I'd imagined, but more terrible. Each one slightly different, as if they were related, but not identical. Their scales caught the light in rainbow patterns. Their webbed hands moved with alien grace. And their faces, those beautiful, awful faces, watched us with an intelligence that was undeniably human and yet completely other. One of them, larger than the others, with scars across its shoulders and a crown of what looked like coral grown into its skull, swam close to our circle of boats. It surfaced fully, revealing a torso that was unmistakably female, but wrong in all the subtle ways I'd glimpsed the night before. When it spoke, the sound was like nothing I'd ever heard. Clicks and whistles, and something that might have been words in a language older than Gaelic, older than Latin, older than any human tongue. Father Brennan held up the last piece of silver, Mrs. Murphy's candlestick gleaming in the dawn light. The merrow watched it, its 2 large eyes fixed on the offering. Then it reached out one webbed hand, moving slowly, deliberately. The priest leaned out carefully and placed the candlestick in those alien fingers. The merrow examined it, turning it over with surprising delicacy. Then it looked at Father Brennan, and something passed between them. Not words, not even understanding exactly, but an acknowledgement. A treaty sealed without language, older than any written law. The creature dove suddenly, taking the candlestick with it. The others followed, their pale forms disappearing into the depths. We waited, boats rocking gently, not daring to move. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then something broke the surface near Captain Doyle's boat. It was a body. Michael Coughlin, preserved by the cold water, his eyes closed as if in sleep. The merrow had brought him back. They surfaced again near the Fitzpatrick brothers' boat, And this time it was Sean Coughlin they offered up, just as carefully preserved. We pulled them both aboard with shaking hands, tears streaming down weathered faces. The merrow watched us retrieve our dead. Then the scarred one surfaced one last time. It looked directly at me. I don't know why me specifically, but I felt the weight of its gaze like a physical thing. And it spoke in a voice that was almost human, words I barely understood but felt in my bones. "Remember," it said, or something like remember. "Remember we are here." Then they were gone, slipping away into the depths, and we were alone with our dead and our wonder and our terror. We rowed back in silence. The Coughlin brothers laid out with their coats covering them, finally home. The village turned out to meet us, and when they saw what we carried, the keening started again, but different this time. Grief, yes, but also something like relief, an ending at least, a body to bury, a grave to visit, more than many families got from the sea. We never found out exactly what happened to the Coughlins. Maybe they fell overboard and the merrow took them out of hunger or curiosity. Maybe they were taken as payment for years of fishing without acknowledgement. Maybe it was simpler than that. Wrong place, wrong time. The ocean's indifference made flesh. Father Brennan said it didn't matter. They'd been returned, which was more mercy than we had any right to expect. The fishing resumed the next week. The nets came up whole. The catch was good. Life in Ballycraig continued as it always had, defined by the rhythms of tide and season. But we were changed. Every morning now, before the boats go out, it's someone walks to the shore and leaves something. A coin, a flower, a piece of bread, just something small. Just something to say. We remember. We know you're there. We respect these waters. I stayed in Ballycraig for another 3 years before moving back to Galway. I married, had children, lived an ordinary life. But I never forgot that morning at the archway. I never forgot the merrow rising from the depths, beautiful and terrible and undeniably real. And I never forgot the scarred one's final words, spoken in a voice that haunted my dreams for years. Remember, we are here. Sometimes, on sleepless nights, I wonder if they're still there, still watching from the depths, still swimming in the cold water between the world we know and the world we've forgotten, still waiting to see if we'll remember or if we'll forget again and force them to remind us. I pour whiskey into the sea when I visit the coast now. Call it superstition if you want. Call it madness. But I've seen what I've seen, and I know what I know. The sea keeps its own counsel and its own creatures, and some bargains, once made, must be honored forever. The water remembers, even if we forget.